Welcome back to Theater Journal Shorts. I'm here today with Dohyun Shin speaking about Queering Colonial Aesthetics, Reimaginations of Guro Nansensu in Contemporary Korean Theater, which is out in our December 2025 special issue on the transnational erotic. That's Theater Journal Volume 77, Number 4. Hello, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Taryn.
I'm really looking forward to our conversation. I was wondering if you could just begin by telling our viewers a little bit about your article and its main argument.
Yeah, sure. My article is about what I call Neo Gyeongsang Theater, which I see had its own wave in 2010 South Korea. So these plays and musicals are set in Gyeongsang, the name for Seoul during the Japanese colonial era. And I used the term Neo Gyeongsang because my article not only discusses how this historical city becomes a backdrop for these works, but more importantly, how this new trend reinterprets Gyeongsang and its culture in response to the post-2010 feminist movement in South Korea
Mm.
around the Me Too movement. In this article, I look into how this political shift birthed queer and gender non-conforming characters in Neo Gyeongsang theater. And I argue that some of these works appropriate the aesthetics and the system of Eroguro Nansensu when introducing such characters. So here, Eroguro Nansensu was an interwar and transnational cultural trend that flourished between World War I and World War II in Tokyo, Japan, and was later transplanted to Gyeongsang during the colonial period. It featured anything erotic, grotesque, and nonsensical and decadent aesthetics, which gave its name Eroguro Nansensu. Ero for the erotic, Guro for the grotesque, and Nansensu for the nonsensical. So Eroguro Nansensu revealed how citizens of Tokyo and Seoul in the early 20th century understood figures and culture that felt new and unfamiliar to them during the periods of modernization and or colonization, especially in the case of Seoul. So as a popular culture, this trend also fetishized non-normative bodies as
Hmm.
eroguro for as urban consumers. And these bodies included racialized bodies, colonized bodies, bodies with disabilities, queer and gender non-conforming bodies. So in this article, I argue that even this cultural trend, eroguro nansensu, lost its popularity with the rise of World War II. Its rhetoric and system have still survived in various cultural forms in contemporary Japan and Korea. We still see rhetoric that fetishizes non-normative bodies as erotic and grotesque to uphold colonial, ableist, and cis-heteronormative ideologies of our time. So in this context, my article further argues that some neo-Gyeongsang theaters attempt to reclaim or at least revisit gender non-conforming figures who had been stigmatized as erotic and grotesque in the early 20th Seoul, and reimagine them as transgressively erogra bodies. So as examples, I focus on the musical fan letter and the stage reading adaptation of K-pop fan fiction, Eroguro Gyeongsang. So in these neo-Gyeongsang performances, I analyze how their erogra protagonists evade, maneuver, and disturb the system of normativity, not only in the fictionalized Gyeongsang, but also in contemporary Seoul, where queer bodies are still marginalized and regulated.
That sounds fascinating, both the transnational historical connections and also the way that you're looking at contemporary theater. How did you come to this topic?
Yeah, I was seeing shows in Taeyanglo, which is a theater district of Korea in the 2010s, and I thought there are quite a few musicals about Gyeongsang, and some media outlets even started to call it as the Gyeongsang trend, and
Mhm.
this really caught my attention because I wanted to know more about why and how this city was being revived in theater in the 21st century. As I started doing my research, I got interested in how these neo-Gyeongsang musicals introduced fantastical characters who stood on the boundary between non-human and human in this decadently romanticized cityscape. At the same time, I was also witnessing the growing backlash against this new trend of feminist movement and also anti-queer rhetoric in Korea. And I think this made me drawn to these characters who would have been labeled as eroguro in the city of Gyeongsang. So this research was later developed into chapter of my dissertation. which is about how post-war Japanese and Korean theater recreates their own visions of erotic and grotesque bodies as a response to each nation's image of the ideal body.
That sounds really interesting. And also, I mean, so many topics in there that resonate across cultures, not just South Korea and Japan, obviously in the US as well. You said that this was part of the dissertation. Could you tell us a little bit more about how this fits into your broader research, or maybe even more broadly than that, current trends in theater and performance studies? Obviously, South Korea is on the map now because of maybe Happy
Mm.
Ending with musicals. But
Yeah.
I'm sure that there's much, much more there.
Mm. Of course. So what I find disturbingly fascinating about neo-Keongsan theater and its appropriation of colonial aesthetics is how this romanticized vision of the past ends up revealing as haunting scars on stage. Like, for example, the system of Eroguro Nansensu and the arresting impact of colonization. So on the one hand, theatricalizing Gyeongsang as a historical city makes us feel that it's just a city of the past, neatly separated from Seoul after Korea's liberation. On the other hand, reenacting the city in contemporary Korean theater becomes an act of theatricalizing the complicated aftermath of colonization and rapid modernization. So in this sense, I think this theatrical reimagination of Eroguro Nansensu in Gyeongsang facilitate multi-temporal and transnational discourse around what was seen and what is seen as the Eroguro body and its counterpart, the ideal national body. So this approach particularly interests me as a theater researcher because it invites audiences to collectively project a new interpretation onto these Aragora figures from their own perspectives in present-day Seoul. And I also believe that this framework might be able to be applied beyond Korea. Many nations have their own versions of an Aragora system, as well as nostalgic periods that problematically consume marginalized bodies as erotic and grotesque. So, in this sense, even if a theatrical representation of a historical city might seem like a nostalgic romanticization of the past, excavating what is actually carried onto a stage through that nostalgia is something that is important to me. And I believe this approach can bring new perspective to this kind of theatrical works that are often dismissed as merely reviving the past for popular entertainment.
That's fascinating. I can see that connecting to things that I look at too with theater in China and Taiwan. But also, I really appreciated what you just said about the framework being more broadly applicable. As somebody who works on Asian theater, I feel that we're often the particular as opposed to the theory or the framework. And so I so appreciate that you're offering something that can move beyond the specific case studies and be applied to other historical, cultural, geographic contexts. Now, my last question, these videos are, designed to help give more access to your work, but especially for faculty who might want to assign your piece to undergraduate readers and give them a little bit of a preview before they dive into the written work. So for those undergrads, could you summarize some of the key takeaway points that you'd like them to leave with after reading? Or, again, zooming out, thinking more broadly about contemporary theater and musical theater.
Sure, I have two things, one culturally specific and the other more general. So, first, for students who might be interested in K-culture like K-pop, K-drama, and K-musicals, I hope this article shows attention within a popular cultural industry in Korea, how it attempts to respond to the cultural and political shifts in this rapidly changing world, sometimes, unfortunately, unsuccessfully, and sometimes in more thoughtful ways. And I also hope this article shows that these attempts can be explored not only through the epistemologies of gender and sexuality from English-speaking world, but also through a historical lens in an Asian context. More broadly, I hope this article offers one way of thinking about history of plays and more generally theater that stages the past. What is hidden or what is romanticized underneath is nostalgic recreation of the past. What is this recreation of the past tell us about our own time and world? How does my own view of the world shape what I see when haunting specters are reenacted on stage? What does it say about myself? And I hope these questions inspire students to find their own eroguro nonsense for their research.
I hope so too. Thank you again so much for taking the time. For our viewers, I'm here today with Dohyun Shin talking about her article, Queering Colonial Aesthetics, Reimaginations of Eroguro Nansensu in Contemporary Korean Theater, which you can find in Theater Journal Volume 77, Issue 4. That's our December 2025 special issue on the transnational erotic. Thank you so much again for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Taryn.